Welcome to another exciting episode of Humanity 8.0, a podcast where we talk about movements and initiatives that seek to move humanity to its next epochal iteration. This podcast is brought to you by Witlingo. When it comes to managing a community, one of the keys to success is the ability to effectively communicate with the members of that community. If you are a service coordinator or responsible for community engagement, Witlingo provides a multi-channel, multilingual notification and engagement platform to help you work more efficiently and effectively. For more information, please visit www.witlingo.com. That's www.witlingo.com. And now, here's your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid.
Steve Clermont, welcome to Humanity 8.0.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for making the time. And today is a Saturday, so I doubly appreciate you taking an hour, a slice from your weekend to speak with me. And I usually do this on Friday, but the reason is something happened yesterday. And so I'm very appreciative of you being very flexible with your time.
No problem. I mean, when you get this close to an election and you work in politics, there really is no such thing as a weekend.
Okay, well, tell me what's in what way are you busy right now, given that we are sort of in the last couple of innings of this game, if you want to use that metaphor. I'm sure you're following. Tell me about how you are sort of, how this season is so special.
Well, thank you. Again, like you said, my name is Steve Clermont. I'm polling director at Change Research, and we're a public opinion research firm that helps Democratic candidates and progressive causes. Democratic candidates win elections, and progressive causes help advance their preferred policies. And so what we do a lot of the times is do polling for candidates and to answer different questions with basically it's just like, how do we win this election? So ask them about name ID, how favorable the candidates are, what the political environment is, where they stand in the particular election, and then what types of messages, when we tell voters, get them more likely to vote for our candidate and less likely to vote for the other candidate. And we work for candidates all up and down the ballot, from U.S. Senate, governor, U.S. Congress, to state legislature and local offices. So as you can see, we have lots and lots of different candidates running for office right now for many different offices. And so we work with a lot of them to put polls in the field, ask voters questions, analyze the results, and then give them advice on what they need to do in order to win. And like a lot of things in politics, everything's very much last minute. There's this sort of adage that the campaign really starts on Labor Day. Mm-hmm. That's true. Reality, candidates are running for years and years and years and months. But a lot of the resources and focus, particularly down ballot races, voters pay more attention when we get closer. So that's when they want information so they can do the last minute communications.
Yeah. So even though voters start paying attention around now, right? You have to do a lot of research ahead of time to be ready with the messaging and so forth. So that's interesting because I think most people think, and maybe I'm mistaken, that polling is sort of objective, right? That you go and you tell them, here are the facts. Again, this is me coming with very simplistic notions. Whereas what you're talking about really is you're partisan in the sense that you're helping one side figure out through polling research, scientific research, right? Finding out where people are to help them win. But doing that in a scientific, objective manner, right? Obviously.
Exactly. I think that there's really public opinion research that relates to politics. There's two different types. One is just sort of evaluate and describe where public opinion is. That's a lot of what we see that's released publicly. It's what the Pew Research Center does. It's what a lot of these groups do. Just like, where does the race stand? What issues are important? And what campaign pollsters do, which is what I have been doing most of my career, is we do sort of the same thing. We want to sort of know where the race is objectively.
Mhm.
And then when we write polls, we want, our goal is for the person taking the survey to not know what side we're on. So if we're saying negative things about the other side, we say negative things about us. Sometimes we just want to present facts. Sometimes it's just like we do 3 very hard-hitting negative messages on the opponent, and the same with the same tone, hard-hitting messages on us. The key is to be as objective as possible, because our goal is not just sort of know where public opinion is, but what types of things do we need to say to shape public opinion to get people to a place where they wouldn't necessarily know that that's where they wanted to go until they got the information.
I see. Okay, so sort of you're doing a deeper dive into to help perhaps the candidate navigate and navigate to a place where they can message more effectively than otherwise.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. So before when we start, just before we started, I made a comment about the poster behind you, LBJ. Okay.
Yes.
And so and as I told you, I think he's one of the most fascinating presidents, most effective presidents. I think just an amazing, sort of larger than life, in my opinion, kind of a guy. So my question is, how did polling, or the kind of polling that you're doing, or did it exist then in the way that it exists today? How was it done back then in the 60s?
In the 60s, it was polling has been around, I think, to sort of modern polling, pretty much since I think the late 40s. That was sort of like the very famous photo of Harry Truman with the headlines, Dewey defeats Truman. And part of it was sort of the early days of polling were showing that Dewey was ahead of Truman. And I think earlier than that, there's a famous Reader's Digest survey where they put an ad in the magazine and then had people say who they're going to vote for and then mail it back in. And they saw that Roosevelt was losing that poll pretty badly, and then he went on to win easily. And they sort of realized, well, we weren't getting an objective view of the population. We're getting an objective view of the people who read our survey or our magazine. And I think when in LBJ's day, that was sort of the early days of telephone polling, where there was enough people that had telephones where people were randomly called, and methods were done to ensure that every person had equal chance of being called. I think sort of before that, there was a process of in-person interviewing where they sort of take a random geography, then like every 10 houses in that geography, and then you go and knock on the door. That's still how polling is done in Africa, Latin America, some of the places without large telephone coverage. And there's a famous story of like one of the early pollsters was Lou Harris, and he polled for Jack Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy. And he showed up, he had this big presentation, this big binder full of data, and there's like, oh, thanks, Lou, we'll take it from here. So it's like before it was like sort of a mix of data, a mix of a gut. You'd call like local precincts captains. What are you hearing from people that you're talking to? There's always been a sense of hearing from the public to find out what's interesting to them. And then the 60s was when that was becoming more professionalized and becoming sort of more possible for you hiring a calling house. Like they do calls over 5 days, you get results, and then you can make decisions from that.
Yeah. So I was looking at your LinkedIn. You have a degree from Berkeley, and then you have a degree from George Mason.
Yes.
Mason is sort of viewed as sort of right-winger, perhaps. Maybe I don't know. Maybe it's me. Whereas Berkeley obviously is the other extreme. So it's very interesting that you went to both of those schools. to,
Um,
to dip your toe into both of those worlds.
exactly. I think George Mason has that reputation, particularly in the economics department,
Yeah.
because they found a market inefficiency with like they could hire scholars with PhDs from Harvard and Yale and Princeton and from the top schools who were conservative, and like they were sort of in less demand at other. It's harder for them to get
What's
positions
smart?
at other
That's
universities.
very smart.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah, they hired. I'm blanking on his name, but they hired a famous economist who worked with Milton Friedman, and I think he got the Nobel Peace Prize, but was sort of the father of neoliberal economics. And I think it was he helped write the Chilean Constitution in 1973, and was able to sort of recruit a lot of people who wanted to learn under him. But I went to get a degree in data science and in statistics and not political, not
Yeah,
economics,
yeah, yeah.
really sort of
But
more
at
of a
least you got it.
skill.
You got a sense of you got a maybe was it at that time um you know the way it is today, like or maybe it was trending towards that. Did you feel
Uh,
there when you were there? Or no?
I did not. I let's see. I went and I think I was definitely 20 years post my undergrad when I went there. So, and I live nearby, so I was sort of more of a night
Yeah.
commuter student. But you'd see signs for like the Ayn Rand Appreciation Society and other sort of random things. But in the engineering department, it was also all sort of like
Yeah.
very straight ahead.
Yeah.
And I was
Take your
working with
classes. Yeah.
non-political people,
Yeah.
very non-political people, and I talk about like politics, and they just sort of like, I don't even know what the hell you're talking
Yeah. I
about.
just got to do my
It was actually
homework.
kind of refreshing to be around sort of
Right.
people that don't
Yeah.
like are tweeting constantly about politics and talking about politics all the time. It
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
kind of refreshing to be
It
around
was
like
refreshing, right? So,
regular normal people.
that's right. Um, so how did you get interested in polling? It feels like at some point, did you go back to school because you decided that, hey, I think I want to do this. I want to do the poll kind of, polling research, or did you?
I pretty much known I wanted to work in politics pretty much like very early on. Like when I was in fourth grade, um, I remember I was always avidly reading the newspaper, and I was like fascinated when during the 1980 primary when there'd be sort of every day sort of this row of pictures of candidates running and how they did in primaries. And my parents talked about politics a lot. They went to some event for John Anderson when he was running for president, and they
Yep.
were saying it's just like Ronald Reagan's a joke and an actor. My mother would take me to vote with her, and I think I like picked in 1980. We vote for Jimmy Carter because we weren't going to waste our vote on John Anderson, which was our original intent. So I always sort of followed it like with pretty degree of I don't say obsessiveness or attention. My grandparents talked about politics all the time. My grandfather had sort of talked about like how he cursed FDR every day of his life till he cashed his first Social Security check.
And then he changed
Um,
his mind.
yes, exactly. Well, still pretty right wing. Would have loved Trump to. He was like a Trumper before his time. Um, so it was always something that was talked about. Like in eighth grade, I did this long report about the 1984 primary and pretty much wrote up every primary and caucus contest. Um, and went to school to study politics and American politics and economics as well. So I kind of always knew, like, I think I constructed a survey experiment and called people for that report in 1984.
Mm.
Like I remember once, I think it was during the 86 Massachusetts governor's race, my mother got we got a poll call in the house, and like I did the whole survey, like and then lied and said I was 18 years old. I went
You
to
wanted to go through the experience, right? That's what you wanted.
exactly.
Yeah.
I did focus group, was a participant in focus groups in college. So it was like when I saw like a job ad for a polling company, like right before I was about to graduate, like that was pretty much what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
I didn't really get a very good grade in my public opinion class, but it was way too theoretical. Um, and then went like that was my very first job out of college. When I went to George Mason, it was really to understand more about data science, advanced analytics, advanced regression, to
Uh-huh.
be better able within my surveys to look at what factors really are motivating people beyond like what they're telling me. And that was right around the time when data analytics and campaigns and modeling voters and trying to understand what voters' opinions were without having to survey all of them and what went into that, I really wanted to learn more about.
Yeah, yeah. So you have been at Change Research since 2018
Yep,
and Third Eye Strategies from 2002 2018, right?
yep,
And so you've seen all the big upheavals, if I may call them so, since about 2000, the election of 2000 and then 2004, where, I mean, for me, I followed 2004 and I was really amazed at how what's his name? Karl Rove was able to, this is what I think happened, right? And I think maybe this is what people think in general. Maybe you can tell me if you think that's what happens. He created a lot of wedge issues, right? That distracted from the big thing at the time, which was the war in Iraq and how people were really dissatisfied. And I think that was the Swift boat thing, right? 2004, I
yep,
think.
yep.
Yeah. I was just amazed at how, I mean, it took quite a bit of talent um, of the Bush campaign to pull that off. It was really engineered, it feels to me. And so from that sort of election on, been paying attention to the level of, I don't know if it's manipulation or engineering that goes into, electing a candidate. If one does their homework in terms of figuring out, and they have a strategy, right? How do I get there, right? I say that because I want to contrast it to what happened in 2016, which was one side did a lot of engineering, it felt, and whereas the other side was not doing a lot of engineering. They were just, I mean, Trump, right? So question one, do you think that the level of sophistication in terms of the campaigns, them also using, I guess the other side also have pollsters. Maybe it's to your credit, you being the pollsters, that you're able to figure out some kind of a way to get to where you need to be, even if it's very challenging the way it was for Bush in 2004. Um, and then contrast that to what happened in 2016. And my question there obviously is, what the hell happened, in terms of the pollsters back in 2016. So what do you think about that sort of, sophistication, it feels to me?
There's a lot in those questions, and I come at this from some knowledge of, I worked for one of the pollsters in Gore's 2000 race. And running for president is very different than anything else.
Mhm.
And honestly, the key to success is building a team that is cohesive, that work well together, that have one primary goal and can build a plan and stick to it.
Mm.
To contrast, there's a lot of presidential campaigns where there's a lot of different personalities between the media consultant, the pollster, the
Mm.
candidate,
Mm.
other people within the campaign. And if like the campaign is dysfunctional and the consultants are working at cross purposes and there's different rivalries and jealousies, that can end up sinking a campaign and that they're much less effective. And you think it just like, we have all the tools in a campaign to run something very sophisticated, drive a message, but it's also very, very easy for a lot of second guessing
Mm.
between the donors, between the candidate and staff, and bringing in more staff. That usually that's what causes people to lose. So, the examples that you gave, the most successful thing that I think the reason why Bush was able to win in 2004, I mean, it wasn't that Rove had this unique genius and understanding
Mm.
of voters that's any greater than anyone else. If he did,
Mm.
the Supreme Court wouldn't have had to intervene in
Mm.
2000, and he would have
Mm.
electoral success
Mm.
post 2004. The success George Bush always had is he had a very cohesive team that worked well together and were not beset with different rivalries and jealousies. They knew what they wanted to do. They went ahead with their goal. They were loyal to Bush, and that was a big key of the success. And I think part of you're right, like Rove did bring up all these different wedge issues, and part of that was happenstance, the situation in San Francisco where Gavin Newsom started issue same-sex marriage licenses, and then there was a response to that. That wasn't something that they engineered, but they were able to take advantage of it.
Yeah.
And I mean, part of it is that the war wasn't going well, but they wanted to use the war and clarity of the war to be able to differentiate from John Kerry as that he's a flip-flopper and he can't be trusted. And that was ultimately what succeeded. There was also this belief that Rove had that the reason why 2000 was close was that there were 4 million missing evangelical voters. And if they were able to get them and mobilize them, they would win the popular vote and they wouldn't have to be bailed out by the Supreme Court like they were in 2000. And that's ultimately like they were looking for wedge issues and opportunities to be able to motivate the evangelicals they thought they didn't get in 2000.
I see.
And in 2016, it's like you mentioned Third Eye Strategies. That was the company that I created. It was sort of that I did freelance polling work with. And I've done in that time period, I did a lot of work in New Mexico, both for nonprofits there and for legislative candidates. And I was leading up to 2016, like within sort of like the advocacy job I had got a lot of exposure to the Obama White House, and just sort of realized it's just like, we need to go in. Hillary's going to be the nominee. We can't lose this election. These Republicans are so terrible, and I was like, okay, Hillary will be fine, sort of. And then I did a poll in December of 2015, my annual sort of landscape poll in New Mexico. And I added her to the favorables for the first time in like, I think about 8 years at that point. And her favorable numbers were awful.
Wow.
And like, I thought there was a point, like she became Secretary of State. Like it was different from when she was running in 2007 and the Republicans hated her. There was just no enthusiasm at all. And it's just like, if you're over 50% unfavorable, you're gonna have a really hard time winning. And it was just like, that was sort of like dawned on me of just like how difficult this was going to be. And I never sort of understood, like they knew that within the campaign. And like, I don't know whether like they tried to change that and tried to get people to view her more favorably and then just weren't able to do it, or they just determined it really wasn't worth doing and that they would just focus on the liabilities of Trump.
Well, I mean, they were running against Trump. I mean,
yeah,
you could have imagined that clown and more. I mean, to this day, I can't believe that he he got elected to this day.
they wanted to run against Trump though.
No,
Because
they
his
did.
numbers are so bad.
They got well, like what is it? Be careful, wish for, you might get it. So they did get it done.
Exactly. But she was a tough, I mean, she had a lot of liabilities to overcome. And then the other thing I found out during the course of that campaign was, I mean, I was trying to get phone bank time to get my polls done. And there was a time like late September, early October where I just wasn't able to get any phone bank time at any reputable phone bank. And then it's a much longer story about like the phone bank that I tried to use and then turned out like that was not the right decision. But I was able to get like, person called me back. It's like, okay, I'm able to get you in to do these 3 polls this week. And it was just like, great. And she's just like, thank you so much. Like, oh, don't thank me. Thank the future president of the United States. And I thought it was weird that because it was around Columbus Day and like, why would Hillary pollsters be canceling polls? And I thought since it was mountain time, like I was doing polling in New Mexico, so it was mountain time. It's just like, okay, they were making a play for Arizona and they decided it's like, okay, they're not going to win Arizona. And then I found out through, I think it was the book Shattered, that they just didn't do any polling at all. They didn't do any like traditional phone polling strategy phone polling in the last 2 months. Like the campaign manager didn't believe in it. He believed in analytics and voter modeling, and their models were saying that they were positioned to win. But there was so much going on at the campaign, the back and forth, and the Comey letter and the Access Hollywood tape that
Right.
kind of needed to see what actual voters' reactions
Yeah.
were beyond like a coefficient applied to the voter file. And they didn't have that information in those last days when things were very up in the air and they were running against someone who
Yeah.
voters didn't really have a sense of like what they were getting and why they would want to be like maybe he could be positive, he'd be the change that we needed, he's a businessman versus just the insanity he was bringing. But that was like I think anything sort of why that happened was that they were not getting like public opinion data from real human beings, answering surveys with detailed questions, or doing a lot of focus groups and um, talking to people really in depth about the race.
So I remember that Tuesday in the morning, the New York Times was telling us, 90% chance, 90+% chance that Hillary was in. And I do remember that number going down throughout the day. And then, after the polls closed, it was clear that something was up because I had bought champagne. It was going to be a party, and so on. Now, my since then the received notion or in the narrative is the pollsters missed a basic point, which is they didn't account for the folks who were going to vote who never voted before, right? Sort of, participation. There was a lot more. And how does one poll for that? I'm sure probably since then, I hope, since then that has been taken into account that there is an element of people who are just gonna have a lot more turnout, right?
Yeah.
Right. And the turnout was in the rural areas. My understanding is in all those little counties that together little districts and counties that together made the difference. Was that part of the story perhaps, why Trump won so unexpectedly? Even I don't think he thought that he was going to win, to be honest with you. At least
No, he didn't. There's a lot of misconceptions about the polling in the 2016 election. I'll help.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
The key part of it is I think that's interesting, and there's a chart that I created, and you can see this of sort of like rolling polling averages. So we were talking about George Mason. One of the things I learned there was to use this program called R to create like simple but elegant graphic interpretations. And like throughout the course of that campaign, like I was doing house polling in New Mexico, and we were trying to like the House had flipped from Democrat to Republican in 2014, and we were bringing it, or we were trying to win it back. And we had a new team. I was part of the new team that was helping to do that year. So like I noticed pretty early on that there was, when you looked at the national polling average, there was never a time the race was stable. It was always Hillary up, Hillary down, Hillary up. It was just sort of like this oscillating sine wave. And part of like when I would do my sort of individual polls in these districts, part of the presentation I would do is just like, okay, here's where the presidential race was at this time. And I think we sort of did our ways when like Hillary was at the top of that cycle, because it was part of like the perspective that like try to bring of just like, okay, the environment was really good when we were polling. The environment has gotten worse. So this is one of the things that we can expect is like what's happening on election day is going to be very determinant of what people's mood is. And part of it we could say I was covering my ass of like the polling wasn't as the Republicans did better in the polling, but a big part of it was also just trying to explain where we are at different points of the cycle. But and then Hillary was like, she was up for a while and the Access Hollywood tape, then the Comey letter came out and she was down. And like we just sort of hit election day that year with her at a down cycle. But a down cycle for her was like she was winning nationally by about 2 points, 2 to 3 points, and that's what she won by. The problem is that there really wasn't a lot of polling that was being done in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and the stuff that was being done was all over the place. And there was like some like universities that would come in that hadn't had a lot of experience there, or I think Michigan State University tried to do some experimental polling. They had like Hillary winning by 20 points. And the campaign, from what I found out, was not doing rigorous polling. But the bigger problem was through the entire time I've been in this industry, we've been facing the fact that fewer and fewer people want to speak to us and do polls. Like it used to be response rates when in the early 90s when I started were in like the 20-30% rate. You could call people up on a landline phone during a certain time period. You know like what percentage would be willing to speak to you. Like that steadily declined to the point where it's like by 2012 it was only like maybe 2 to 3%. And it stayed stable for a while. And I think we took for granted the factors the that we could figure out ways to like model the electorate and weight the electorate. So even if we got a low response rate, what we'd have would be representative. And there were a couple things that shifted. One was that in 2012 and in earlier elections when Obama was running and when Bush was running, there really was no big political difference between those who graduate from college and didn't graduate from college. And I could sort of see, and like depending on like how, and to get too technical, depending on how you do calling and do polling, like the more attempts you make to reach one voter, the more likely you're to get the right educational balance, which is I think like 65% non-college and 35% college graduates. And if you do polling quickly, where it's like you call a number one or two times, then you move on to new numbers and just call down the list till you get your completes, you're more likely to get college graduates in your sample because college graduates are more likely to take surveys than non-college graduates. And I noticed in some public polling that the percentage of like college graduates is start creeping up to like 45, 50% or more. And it wasn't a reason why a poll would be wrong. And in 2016, it was because Donald Trump was really being able to persuade people who had not graduated from college, particularly white voters, white males who had not graduated from college, to support him. And that was, and so we saw the results, and it was just like there were too many college graduates in samples, and that was a big reason for some of them being off. That's sort of the accepted reason. I think the other part of it is just communication patterns were changing. By most of the polls in 2016, there were a few companies that were experimenting with online surveys like YouGov, I think SurveyMonkey and Ipsos. But by and large, most of the polling was by people calling people on the telephone. And I think now when you look at most surveys, that's a very small percentage of the polls that are being done. Change Research was founded as a response to the 2016 election to try to find a different way to reach voters. And so we do our surveys 100% online through social media advertising and text to web interviewing. And that's what has changed the most. Like the 2016, like there was just a change in who Trump was trying to persuade. So that educational shift that didn't matter, educational imbalance didn't matter before, mattered a lot. There was sort of inconsistent polling in the swing states, and just a dramatic change in communications technology and how people wanted to spend their time, and they don't really want to spend it talking to a pollster on the phone for half an hour. But what we found since then is like people will respond to text messages to an online survey. People will want to join online panels. People will see an ad in social media and take a survey. So it was just sort of like we were trying to like get as much juice from a lemon and not sort of realizing that the lemon was pretty much dried out, but we were still trying to squeeze juice out of it in 2016. So it's a long-winded way to sort of answer. It's like one part of 2016, the polls were right. And then the other is, you're right. There were new people that were voting. There were shifts in the electorate that you could sort of see, but didn't realize just how dramatic they were going to be. And I think since we've had nothing but high turnout elections since then, so even the people that are doing phone polling, like the universe of sampling that we will do, which is mostly people that have voted in recent elections, that includes all the people that have come in for Trump.
Yeah.
Part of the thing I find kind of laughable when they see on Twitter before I went on my Twitter detox of just like, oh my God, it's Kamala's tied with Trump in this poll, and this poll had Biden way up, and it's just like, okay, polling is done differently now. But the other thing is just like, I don't know who the voter is who didn't vote in 2016, didn't vote in 18 or 20 or 22, but it's now going to come out in 2024 to vote for Donald Trump in his third presidential election. I mean, I kind of get it if you're young and just registered, but like the idea that there's going to be this influx of new voters this year that are going to throw all the polls off, it just doesn't.
Right. Okay.
It
Makes sense.
doesn't. Not going to happen.
Right. Right.
If it is, I've been wrong plenty of times, but it's just like maybe it's my own failure of imagination, but like if you haven't voted for Trump by now, I don't see that you're gonna magically come out. Like seeing him now and seeing him try to answer questions like as incoherent as he's ever been. Like I don't know like how that's gonna be more attractive than 8 years ago when he was a little bit
Yeah.
more with it.
Well, no, thank you for that. That's actually really, really useful. Helps me understand better. And I'm sure a lot of folks out there who are following to the same degree that I am, or maybe less, or maybe more, are going to benefit from that. Do you think that people voted for Trump, or they just voted against Hillary, against Biden 2020, and against, meaning, I think and tell me if I'm wrong, there were lots of folks in 2016 who had voted for Obama. At least this is one of the narratives out there, who voted for Trump because they were about only one thing, really. Again, it's me from my distance, which is change. Remember, well, of course you
Yeah.
remember, Obama was all about changing from the era of, the Bush, the disgusting era of the Bush, if I may say so, to something new. Hope, change, hope, those were the themes. And after 8 years, things only went worse with the financial crisis, and so on and so forth. And of course, the Tea Party came out in 2010?
2010, yep.
2010. And so, do you think that it's about knowing the guy? Because I don't subscribe to the notion that half of the electorate is sort of, has been hit by a virus of insanity and racism and so on. I just don't buy that. What I buy more, and again, I may be wrong, what I buy more is that there's a lot of anger out there at the system, at the establishment, and how it continues to ignore them, continues to, run against their will. Right? I mean, towards the end of this conversation, I want to do a thought experiment with you, with the premise, demonstrable, that Congress votes again and again and again and again against the will of the people. We want assault weapons ban, and we don't. We want actually the public option. We don't get it. We want many, many things.
Yeah.
We don't. We want to reduce the budget in terms of the military, and yet again, that, bipartisanship, happens actually exactly on those issues that there is a consensus out there. So it feels to me that, and maybe you can disabuse me of this notion, that the vote for Trump is a vote, just a fuck you kind of a thing to the system. And the more outrageous he is, the more appealing he is, it mystifies me to this day that I see some people like Rachel Maddow, the MSNBC crowd, just being mystified day in and day out, show in and show out, one show after show after show, the same thing. Let me show you yet another way where he is an outrageous person, yet another way where he's crazy, as if, and they seem to not, as if that was going to change the vote of somebody who is voting for him, as opposed to, thank you very much for more evidence that he is actually anti-establishment. He is not anti-establishment. He's just an outrageous character, right? And perhaps that kind of a middle finger, collective middle finger to the establishment is what makes him, what made him. And so, and this thing about where, we're trying to understand why, like, is he convincing them? I don't think he's convincing them. I think I think he's just, going viscerally and saying, let's just give the finger to them this time. What do you think about all of this mishmash that I just said?
Um, it gives me a lot of different things to respond to, and I'm just trying to figure out how to sort of systematically go through it. I think that the first thing to sort of think about with Trump is just to take a step back and realize of just like, I know he's dominated our political lives since 2015, which is it's
Yeah.
now been like
Almost 10
9 years of
years.
it.
Yeah.
9 years of this. And uh, there's a couple reasons, but I think the thing is, it's important for us not to overestimate him, overestimate his strength, make him out to be strong and big and strong. He's weak, and like he's run in two national campaigns. In one, he got like I think about like 46, I don't know the exact percent, about 46% of the vote. It's only a couple points more than Mike Dukakis got in 1988. And then after being president for 4 years, he got all the way up to 47% of the vote. Like in the entire time he was president, his job approval rating was in the low 40s or high 30s. There's never been a point where the majority of this country has been behind him the way they were for George W. Bush, the way they were for George H.W. Bush, Ronald Reagan, and any president that's come before. There's a lot of he is one of the luckiest people in politics that there has ever been, and that sort of performance in 2016 was about as lucky as you could ever get in terms of narrowly winning the right states in the right ways. And even in 2020, like a few thousand votes in some different states, he would have been reelected. But I think the point of it is not bigger than sort of what he is. And the need for change is the voters are not wrong in that. And it's like there's this chart that I show that I've been showing now for 10 years, which is it's just a simple chart goes over the last 100 years of the income distribution that goes to the bottom 90% of the public. And it was sort of lower pre-Great Depression, like after World War II and through the 60s, it was like very high. I think it was like over 60%, close to 70%. And then 1980 beyond, it's like fallen down precipitously. Now it's below 50%, one of the lowest points it's ever been. At the same time, you look at the chart of like the top 0.1%. And it was like spiked. It was very high in the 20s, crashed. Then it was like very low through these periods, then went up, was very high, then financial crash, and then went down, and then went right back up again. And then part of it's just sort of like, you sort of think about like what happened under Obama. And it was sort of this unique circumstance where it's like, you think this crash happens, sort of breaks up concentrated wealth. And then what they figured out was a way to, it's like, no, get right back at what that level was, that there's not going to be what happened after the Great Depression is going to happen again. And that has been it's like they say about like climate change. It's not so much that there's global warming and things are just going to generally get hotter, which are going to test from shivering outside today in September when we're still in the middle of summer. And it's that it creates instability in our weather system. And sort of what this inequality has done is just created this instability. And like the Obama years were interesting because it's like you look at it and just from the point of beginning to the end, unemployment was very low throughout it. The stock market was low. It doubled during his time in office. You sort of look at like there was almost no inflation. But yet like part of it was just like you look at the conditions under Obama. If it was Trump from the first minute, it's like the greatest economy ever, greatest recovery, never thought possible. And meanwhile, we had the 2016 Democratic primary was Bernie Sanders basically saying the economy is terrible, unequal, it's rigged, and you're getting screwed by it. And then Hillary Clinton, like basically saying the same thing. And as part of like the challenge of Democrats is that we had two unbelievably successful presidencies under Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. And by the end of 8 years, we took no credit for it. The Clinton boom, where it's just like by the year 2000, like over 60% of people in this country believe we're headed in the right direction, something that we haven't come close to since then. But meanwhile, we had like a change election, which is part of it's normal. We have 8 years of a cycle and we want for that to end. But now we're just doing it more frequently. We're changing Congress, changing House and Senate every 2 years. But like we as Democrats didn't fight that election of just like we had this disaster, economic disaster, and we're much stronger now. Obama came in about as like bad a situation as you can be. Like the recovery was not perfect. It left a lot of people behind. It left a lot of frustration behind. Um, Part of that was Republicans continually blocking using the levers the power they have to block things. But we don't have a narrative of this is what democratic economics really delivers. And I think Bill Clinton gave this stat during his convention speech a couple of weeks ago, which is true. It's something that my friend Simon Rosenberg who was formerly now at Hopium Chronicles talks about, which is since the fall of communism in 1989, like I think Democrats have created like over 45 million new jobs, Democratic presidents, and Republican presidents have created 2. But we've been so ineffective at telling that story that people inherently believe Republicans are better at the economy. But part of that is just also this crushing income inequality, these differences that exist in different places, and all the other societal and cultural upheavals. Like, and any number of them. The one I like to look at is just comparing now to 30 years ago, the percentage of women who have recently received college degrees and graduate degrees. And we're going through major societal changes and economic changes and technological changes. And for there not to be backlashes in our politics, like we should accept that, but we don't really talk about it and address it during the course of these campaigns. So if you want to look at the real cause from Obama to Hillary, or Obama's win in 2012 to Hillary's loss in 2016, if you just look at the exit polls, it's like it screams out to you the decline in vote for Democrats among unmarried men. And the Democrats spent a lot of time in the lead up to the 2016 election focusing on what they called the coalition of the ascendant, which was people, but professionals, communities of color, unmarried women. And we did expand the vote with them, but just sort of ignored sort of the non-college unmarried man, massively shifted to the right and undid all those gains. So it's just like we want to think like in politics, like we're have the finger on the pulse and really smart with these right strategies and messaging. But like the people and the upheaval and the change that's occurring is we don't have a handle on that, and no one does. And so it's not so much like you're right. The country didn't all of a sudden become like sexist and misogynist and racist. It was we're processing a lot of different changes in an economic environment that doesn't work for many people. And then just recently we've thrown COVID and all of that onto this, social media and the influence of right-wing social media that's, as we found out this week, being funded through different Russian proxies. There's a lot of stuff that's going on. And that's like, that instability is what fuels like Trump's message. But even with that, it's not getting more than 47% of the vote. But I think we need to be sort of more mindful of how much things have changed outside of the realm of politics.
Yeah.
That is driving what people's frustrations are that aren't being met. Like you said, public option not being met, Congress not being responsive to these things. Congress has become a very sclerotic, how do you say that properly, body, where the rules are now just sort of making it impossible to do anything. And we have a Supreme Court that is completely unhinged and out of control. And that's just sort of the weird flukiness of our system where we have these lifetime appointments, but they only come up at different times, and whoever's the president and Senate like can fill it. But we have a Supreme Court where the majority has been appointed by but presidents that didn't win the popular vote, and confirmed by senates that were not even elected by a majority of the American people.
Yeah.
And it's just like our institutions are not really set up to meet the challenges of right now. And we're sort of seeing it in the sort of the weirdness that we've sort of experiencing through the last decade.
Okay.
You've been listening to Humanity 8.0 with your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of Witlingo.